Okay, welcome to Lime Time in Texas, our podcast series on lime. And today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Over the years, I've got a lot of questions asked to me, so I've kind of jotted down a lot of those questions. I'm going to try to do just a question and answer session here today, giving you really short, quick answers to as many questions as I can go through here today. So I want to start off with a little bit of a disclaimer and a comment. The answers that I'm going to provide are not going to be necessarily comprehensive. They're intended to be very concise and to the point as possible. The answers are basically my opinions based on my experience, and so they don't necessarily reflect any official position held by the Lime Association of Texas. Most of the answers that I'm going to talk about today pertain to lime used in soil stabilization or as an additive in hot mix asphalt. If you want more comprehensive answers to some of these questions or want to discuss any of these, please contact me. I'll be glad to go over any questions that you may have. Okay, I'll start off with the first question. What is lime fluff and how do you account for it in the soil stabilization process? Well, lime fluff is a volumetric change that happens with the clay soil once you add lime to it. As a general rule, we get roughly about 1 inch of fluff for every 8 inches of soil stabilization. So it does need to be accounted for, because if you don't, you're going to end up with an inch. If you're going to go stabilize an 8-inch layer and you don't account for that fluff, you're going to end up hauling off an additional 1 inch of soil off of that project. So it's not exactly 1 inch per 8 inches. Every soil is a little bit different depending on the mineralogy and the chemical makeup of that clay soil. But that's kind of a good rule of thumb. And as you kind of work with a particular soil, you kind of get a feel for about how much it's going to fluff up. The next question is, what is a mellowing period and why is it necessary? Well, with lime, it has, after you've mixed it together, there's typically at least 1 day to 3 day mellowing period is generally recommended. And that's really, the reason it's necessary is there's a chemical process going on to form the pozzolanic cements. And for that to happen, it takes time, because clay has an extremely high surface area, and it takes time for that lime to get in there and work through that surface area. The other thing is that clay particles, and I've talked about this in some other presentations, are microscopic in size. So they're so small and they got tremendous area, it takes time to do that. So I say it's kind of like cooking a turkey. You got to bake it in the oven. You don't really want to throw it in a microwave, and you're just not going to get the same result if you do that. So it does take some time. What is the difference between soil modification and soil stabilization? That's our next question. Both of these are where you're adding amount of lime to a soil. If you follow the test procedure, what we call the Eads-Grimm test procedure, and get the pH up to 12.4, it'll tell you what percent of lime that you need to maintain that soil at a 12.4. You're going to get a stabilized pavement layer there. If you use anything less than that, you're basically going to get a modified pavement layer or subgrade layer there. The big difference is the stabilized is permanent. The modified soil is not necessarily permanent. You get some benefits out of the modified if you do it modified by getting it to, to workability and the breakdown in the PI and gradation change. Some of the positive benefits that you also get with stabilization, you just don't get the pozzolanic reaction that it's going to continue to gain strength over time. So that's the main thing you miss out on if you do modification versus stabilization. Well, what types of soil need lime and what types do not? That's our next question. And so the types that need lime are clay soils, and the more expansive the clay soil, typically the more lime you're going to need, and typically becomes to where lime is, I won't say the only choice, it's probably definitely the most logical choice when you're in highly expansive clays. So there's really only about 4 soil types in the world, and that's gravel, sand, silt, and clay. Lime really works primarily in just clay soil. Now, obviously, you never just find just gravel by itself or just lime, just gravel or just sand, or often you don't find them just by themselves. A lot of times it's a combination of, sand and clay together and things like that. So, but generally speaking, you have to have a significant amount of clay for lime to be able to work and to produce those pozzolanic cement. The next question is, what areas of Texas have soils that need lime? Generally speaking, you can find soils all across Texas that might need lime. Anywhere there's kind of ancient riverbeds and playa lakes and bottoms of, where things like that, where water has flown before, those may need lime. But as a general rule, the most often you see is along the I-35 corridor and east. About 2/3 of all of that area as you go towards East Texas from that I-35 corridor east can have highly expansive clay soils. So that's the most part of the areas of the state that need it. As you go further into West Texas, you get more into sandy soils. You typically are not going to see lime used as frequently or see clay soils as frequently. What are the key benefits of using lime in soil stabilization? One of the most important ones is we're trying to kill the potential of that clay soil to shrink and swell, because that's a really big problem. If you build any kind of structure on top of an expansive clay soil, that soil is going to expand, and it's going to, with expansion pressures up to 30,000 psi, it's going to move anything that's on top of that. Killing the shrink and swell of the clay soil is one of them. Improving the workability of that soil is another one, so that you can get in there and get it to grade and make it workable. And it also produces a very uniform layer throughout that, so you don't have hard spots and soft spots. So that's one of the other benefits. And then the long-term benefit is that it produces pozzolanic cements. So you get some initial strength at the beginning of when you do lime stabilization, but that strength will continue to grow up over time and continue to gain strength. And so again, I've mentioned before that we'll see 50 to 100, maybe 200 psi unconfined compressive strength at the initial stage of using lime stabilization. Over time, you'll see it up 700 psi or above on pavements that are 50, 60, 70 years old. Those things continue to gain strength. Are there special weather considerations when using lime? That's our next question. And so to answer that one, generally speaking, if it's not frozen, obviously if it's frozen outside, if it's below freezing, you're going to have a hard time, particularly if you're using lime slurry to get it to pump out of the truck. So you don't typically want to do it when the weather is that cold. Other than that, if it's raining, you don't want to use lime, obviously, while it's raining. So that's kind of the two limitations. If you're using dry lime, obviously you don't want to use it where it's really windy. That's the three that come to mind is when you want to, special considerations there. Other than that, you can pretty well use lime year-round. Next question, what are the most common misconceptions about lime? Well, I can think of a couple. The most common one that I hear is people often say that the problem with lime is it leaches out. Lime, if it's used properly and you follow the design procedure, it's almost impossible for it to leach out. When people say that lime leaches out, there's generally two things have happened. Either it's a misapplication where somebody tried to add lime to like a pure sandy soil, which very, very rarely would ever happen. So yes, if you put lime in with a very, very low pI material, it could definitely leach out, but that almost never happens. More often than what happens is that people don't use enough lime to get to where it's stabilized. So when they put lime in that soil, and they go to test the pH, and the pH doesn't really show up on when you use phenolphthalein, which is the indicator. So they think, oh, the lime leached out. Well, the lime, in fact, got consumed within that clay soil in that chemical process, so it didn't really leach out. So it's very, very rare that you actually see or hear of lime actually leaching out of a pavement structure when using lime stabilization. So my conclusion with that is if you do it correctly, it's almost impossible. Another misconception that I hear about lime, I hear a lot of times the questions say lime is not available or is there's a lime shortage. It's very, very rare that there's a lime shortage. I will point out that generally when that's happening, when someone tells you that they can't get lime, it's because they didn't give enough notice to the lime producer. They can silo a little bit of it at these terminals, but it's not like going and buying aggregate that you can just put out there and store it for a year. So generally speaking, you need to kind of let your lime supplier know at least a week to 3 weeks in advance. Obviously, the longer lead time they have to know, then they have more time to plan for it. So usually when you hear somebody say that they can't get lime, it's usually because they called the night before and said, hey, we need 1,000 tons of lime tomorrow. Oftentimes they're not going to be able to get that because they can't set up the trucking, and this is just a production facility that has schedules at what they're going to produce each day. So that's a fairly common misconception that I hear also. So that's all we have time for today. I'll be addressing some more of these in some future podcasts. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to contact me and we'll add them to the list. Thank you for watching this episode of our podcast. If you want to learn more about the use of lime, reach out to us on our website at limetexas.org. You can also email me at dalerand@limetexas.org. And please follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.